After months of investigations, hearings, covert and overt threats, and blacklisting, the left was still far from being fully defeated. When the HUAC investigated the German-Austrian composer Hans Eisler, who had written the score for Hangmen Also Die, they described him in their introduction as the Karl Marx of communism in the field of music. Eisler responded, "I would be flattered." The blacklist also did not eradicate all possibilities for filmmaking, particularly outside Hollywood. Made in 1953 and shown in 1954, Salt of the Earth featured a roster of blacklisted talents such as Herbert J. Bieberman, director, Paul Jarrico, producer, Michael Wilson, writer, Will Geer, actor, and Sol Kaplan, composer. This semi-documentary tale of discrimination and union struggles, acted by two separate groups of professionals and non-professionals, is about a striking mining community in New Mexico. The film cleverly shifts narrative course from the problems of Chicano miners to a story about women's emancipation and their twofold fight, at home against husbands' machismo and ignorance, and at the mine against the police and strikebreakers. This landmark film was one of the first and most effective instances of leftist cinema made entirely independent from, and even in opposition to, Hollywood norms and values. The blacklist as a sign of moral bankruptcy went beyond politics. Hollywood writer Edward Hughes knew that any ideology, left or right, without basic moral codes, was prone to drift into fascism. Hughes, a war veteran and communist, was summoned before HUAC in 1951, but did not appear for the hearing. A few months later, he was named by the director Frank Tuttle, who failed to give any details about Hughes's first name or the extent of his involvement in the party. He was later named again by other witnesses and finally, 2 years after receiving his subpoena, appeared before the committee on the condition that the hearing would not be televised. Hughes, defiant and steadfast, returned the committee's aggression with sarcastic language. He cited 4 amendments to the United States Constitution to argue that the hearings were illegal. He then was blacklisted and disappeared from the film industry until the 1970s. In Black Eagle, Robert Gordon, 1948, based on an O. Henry story, Hughes seemingly uses Columbia Pictures' obsession with horses as the starting point of the plot, another B-movie, but swiftly moves on to a corrupt community that after a recent inflation has drifted towards violence and blackmail. Black Eagle is about a hobo called Jason, played by William Bishop, who arrives in the troubled Texas town and reluctantly joins the community only to avoid being hanged for riding a horse that doesn't belong to him. Caught in a widespread intrigue between the treacherous vigilantes and the law, the latter also taken into the hands of a frenzied mob, he hears from a local that, "Down here, you're either for or against. You better make up your mind." If Hughes was a true believer in communistic ideals, then this is the work of a bitter, disillusioned communist who, while maintaining the framework of the ideology for which he had fought, gives an air of hopelessness. Jason is a morally responsible figure in a world where moral responsibility is no longer a virtue. Jason cleans the town, rides away, and rejoins the hobos. Like High Noon, which would come 4 years later, Jason reaches the point of disgust with such a place and has to leave it behind, anticipating the wave of migration of Hollywood left in the years to come. The toll of the blacklist was not always immediately visible. It was like an unnamed, unregistered disease, silently killing and ravaging careers. Even those who had been officially subpoenaed or accused of communist-affiliated activity often saw their careers decline rapidly, not necessarily from formal action, but because of rumours, gossip, and vicious articles written by anti-communist columnists. One such case was Edward G. Robinson, who had quietly supported the Hollywood 10 and had been a fellow traveller behind the scenes. He was never called to testify and never officially condemned, yet roles became so scarce that he even offered to appear before the committee, but Hewitt showed little interest. Between June 1949 and July 1953, nearly 4 full years, he appeared in only 2 films. For a man who had once appeared in at least 2 films every year, this was a clear sign of quiet banishment. A scene from Edward G. Robinson's Our Vines Have Tender Grapes, directed by Roy Rowland in 1945. Written by Dalton Trumbo, the film would likely have been viewed by Hewitt as an example of smuggling subversive messages into movies.
Why, Yenta me? What's the matter?
Oh, Pa, but I just killed a red squirrel. She picked up a rock and she killed him dead.
Yes, but you really didn't mean to, Selma.
But it isn't what you mean to do, Pa. It's what you do.
Pseudonyms were common in jazz, often for commercial reasons. Musicians under contract to one label could not legally record with artists from another. The problem was swiftly resolved. Coleman Hawkins changed his credit to Carlton Harkins. Peggy Lee chose Susan Melton, and Charles Mingus became Baron Fingus. Even Cannonball Adderley rebaptized himself as Buckshot LaFunk. Hollywood learned a lesson from that. When the blacklist was normalized, with hundreds of talents forced into joblessness, a black market emerged that could at least benefit the writers by assuming other names and selling their scripts using fronts. The real people, and occasionally well-established writers themselves, who brokered scripts. The front handed over the script to the studio and took the screen credit. After deducting their share, the rest of the money went to the real writer. Dalton Trumbo wrote the essential film noir Gun Crazy. However, it was writer Millard Kaufman's name that appeared as the screenwriter. An excellent writer in his own right, Kaufman did it as a favour to Trumbo. Similarly, the blacklisted Albert Maltz used Michael Blankfort as a front for the revisionist western Broken Arrow. It all got complicated when these films won awards. Trumbo anonymously won an Oscar for his script for Roman Holiday. Naturally, he couldn't collect it, as it was credited to Ian McClellan Hunter. The Academy later reinstated Trumbo's credit, and in 1993, his widow received her late husband's Oscar. A similar situation occurred when Michael Wilson and Carl Foreman's script for The Bridge on the River Kwai won an Oscar. This time, the award went to the writer of the original novel, the Frenchman Pierre Boulle, who didn't speak a word of English. Sometimes the front was technically illiterate, like Robert Rich, the nephew of the B-movie studio owners King Brothers, who fronted Donald Trumbo for his script for The Brave One. When the film won the Oscar for Best Script, nobody saw the sight of Rich, who was incapable of weaving together 2 lines on stage anyway. This aroused suspicion about the existence of a black market, something which a defiant Trumbo later confirmed in a TV interview.
Well, this is just one version. I think this was, March 1st, 1955. In the early stages, we called it The Boy and the Bull. I wrote it in 52. I have 3 or 4 other versions, but they're in a box in the attic. I'll be glad to get them for you or anybody else. But there's no problem about proving authorship. The problem in Hollywood has been to admit authorship.
Part of the left first got out of town to dodge subpoenas. Later, they had to get out of the country to stay alive, to eat. Rebecca Prime, the author of Hollywood Exiles in Europe.
Of the roughly 300 individuals whose careers in Hollywood were ended by the blacklist, only a small percentage chose to leave America. Those who left did so not in a mass exodus, but in a trickle, their timing and choice of destination based on individual circumstances and opportunities. London welcomed the largest group of blacklisted American filmmakers, over 20 at the community's peak, while Paris, Rome, and Madrid were home to smaller and more fluid groups of Americans during the 1950s and 1960s. Across the Atlantic, Mexico City hosted a significant colony of Hollywood exiles, attracted by the city's reputation as a haven for anti-fascists and progressives, along with the fact that no passport was required for entry.
American cinema in exile therefore arose on shaky, uncertain ground, hidden behind pseudonyms across Latin America and Europe. The exiles were treated with respect and revered as people who, after all, had worked in Hollywood. The most successful of the exiles were those who overcame the gloom and underwent a change of identity. European exile suited Joseph Losey, Jules Dassin, and, to some extent, Cy Enfield. Their films became bolder and more radical in form. The European careers of these directors were also delightfully eclectic. Dassin worked across Britain, France, Greece, Italy, Spain, and Turkey, producing films as diverse as a first-rate Nikos Kazantzakis' adaptation of He Who Must Die and a French gangster film, Rififi. Losey shot in England, Italy, Spain, and France, exploring genres that ranged from sci-fi and Ibsen adaptations to World War I dramas and spy comedies. Yet, the state of exile was rarely addressed in their films. The writers and directors were keen to show their assimilation rather than their differences with the new environment. We don't know whether there is any link between clinical phobia and the fear of ideological otherness, but two major forces in the anti-communist crusade in America, J. Edgar Hoover and Howard Hughes, were both afraid of germs. As head of the FBI between 1924 and 1972, Hoover often compared communism to a virus or a germ. Under his directorship, the Bureau transformed into an efficiently authoritarian outfit aimed at the ideological vaccination of the nation. Hoover liked to appear in films and newsreels, warning against lurking dangers. Parallel to supporting the witch hunt, he also pressured Hollywood to produce films that confirmed the extent of the Red Threat. Hollywood complied. In a series of widely distributed films, Russian agents were disguised as average Americans, compromising American institutions from within. They were depicted as worse than common gangsters, since whatever evil they did also came with a touch of psychopathic behavior.
Dad, tell me the truth, will you? Are you a Red or not?
All right, I'll tell you the truth. I'm a member of the Communist Party. And I have been for 9 years.
When I was a kid, about 9 or 10, I used to tell myself I wanted to grow up to be like my dad. Before I do that now, I drop dead.
One of the first examples of such FBI-endorsed films was produced by Howard Hughes shortly after he took over RKO. I Married a Communist, 1949, which had to change its title after only one dismal preview to The Woman on Pier 13, features Robert Ryan as an ex-communist who has now become a San Francisco Docklands executive. His bubble of renewed faith in capitalism bursts when communists start blackmailing him using his old party membership card. Hughes used the script of the film as a test of loyalty among RKO directors. Anyone who refused to direct it was deemed a Red. Joseph Losey, Nicholas Ray, and John Cromwell turned it down. 2 were later blacklisted. The script, a mess from the start, was partly inspired by the Soviet spy Elizabeth Bentley, who defected and offered paid advice and stirring anti-Red speeches to anyone willing to pay for such services, from the FBI to Catholic groups. Portrayed in the film by Janice Carter, she is one of the many seductive femme fatales of anti-Red films, suggesting that the Communist Party must have been a place swarming with sexy blondes aroused by Engels's words.
Communist doctrine is founded on the teaching of Karl Marx as embodied in his book The Capital and his later works and pamphlets. The basis of this doctrine is the
2 nights later, the opening of class at the workers' school, finds Bill Jones and other party recruits studying Marxism, its principles, strategy, and tactics. Nina Petrovka, chosen for the introductory lecture because of her charm and personality, explains the basis of communism.
Communism continued to be a first-person nightmare in the past tense. Thus came Warner Brothers' I Was a Communist for the FBI, 1951, a hysterical hymn to stool pigeons and the tools of surveillance. Having previously made one of the worst pro-Soviet films of the war years, it now made sense for Warner to make one of the worst anti-Red ones. The film features the most complete set of vice activities attributed to communists. It shows progressive movements being used by communists, including the civil rights movement. They cripple the joints, a term for bringing factory production lines to a halt by manipulating unions. In a rare narrative film reaction to HUAC, the communists rehearse their pre-written statements and sarcastically refer to the use of the Fifth Amendment. They even brutally murder an FBI agent with a kitchen knife.
The introduction of Bill Jones to communist strategy. A misguided young man, fallen under the spell of Marxian hatred and revenge, unaware that he is only the tool of men who would destroy his country. The signs didn't tell of the worldwide Marxist racket intent on spreading dissension and treason.
In another film, The Red Menace, 1949, a war veteran robbed of his savings is lured into the party where he hooks up with a woman of Russian origin. Told in flashback as they run away from communists, it's one of the 6 films R.G. Springsteen, a quickie Western specialist for Republic Pictures, made in 1949. A slightly better work among the anti-Red films, The Red Menace, tries to establish a dialectical approach to America first. As raw and one-sided as this dialectic is, it gives space to debates, including one between an Irish priest and a communist Jewish poet, on ideology, God, and democracy. The poet, disillusioned with the party when he is barred from saying that Marx's ideas were a continuation of Hegel's, commits suicide. Played by Shepard Mencken, this is perhaps the only believable character in the red-baiting films of 1949 to 1952. These most explicitly propagandistic films made in American narrative cinema after the war were half entertainment, half angry tirade against an assumed communist takeover of the United States. What they all share is sketching of communism as a cynical anti-ideology, refusing to acknowledge the most impactful aspects of communism on the American public. They reduce it to mere racketeering.
You know, I read a lot of books. I have to keep up with things. And from what I understand, the communists don't give nobody a second chance. Now, that's where the United States is different. We give folks just as many chances as they deserve.
The idea of communists taking over the United States was always rather far-fetched. Communist parties were active in gaining significant ground in democratic elections in France, Italy, and Greece, yet they did not undermine democracy or pose a real threat. By the end of the 1930s, the Communist Party of America had around 80,000 members. Not a huge number compared with, for instance, a 2/3 less populous Britain, which by 1942 had 54,000 members. The socialist values promoted by American communists were not drastically different from the general post-war plans of Britain's Labour government. One of the greatest American writers and an occasional Hollywood screenwriter, Dashiell Hammett, once said, "If our government is strong enough to withstand criticism, it is strong enough to survive. If it is not, then it is not worth preserving." In the absence of radicals, the political landscape of the 1950s was comparatively tame. Many liberals had survived the witch hunts and were now making well-meaning films, ostensibly to tackle the big questions of their time. Yet these films often lacked edge, depth, and vision. This category encompasses a wide range of films that feel like several steps backward compared with the cinema of the 1930s and 1940s. They're corrupted by television's indifference to production design and by the format's reliance on the medium shot. They are heavy with messages and monologues that only on paper sound progressive. Career from 1959, a muddled narrative based on an interesting idea, is one such film. Career is perhaps the first mainstream film in which it shows an actor being subpoenaed and blacklisted, with people close to him suffering the consequences. Tony Franciosa plays Sam Lawson, the actor, surrounded by Shirley MacLaine, Dean Martin, and Carolyn Jones. Sam leaves his hometown and fiancée behind in the hope of catching a break in New York theatre. The film follows a series of frustrating situations in which he becomes entangled with 3 women. Much of this unfolds after he teams up with Dean Martin's penniless but ambitious theatre director, Maurice Novak. In the end, it becomes a chronicle of the trials and tribulations of a mediocre man. Directed by Joseph Anthony, Career remains enjoyable in scattered moments. It also offers a glimpse of the Los Angeles to New York exodus of talent following the Blacklist. People who crossed the country, returning to where many of them had originally come from, hoping to find work in television, theatre, or other media, anything but Hollywood. One of the greatest actors of his generation, John Garfield, was subpoenaed in March 1951. He was not a party member, yet his close association with many who were, and his iconic rebellious screen persona, made him an easy target. He was asked why had he supported the Joint Anti-Fascist Refugee Committee dinner. The climate of fear was such that one could scarcely remind that anti-fascism once was considered a noble cause. Garfield said he could not remember. For what he said and what he did not say, Garfield was attacked by both left and right, early versions of today's social media lash-wielding virtue signallers. Garfield began to sink. He was not accused, he was not charged, yet he was treated as if already condemned. Acting offers declined. He heard that a producer was looking for a John Garfield type for a new film. He went in and offered himself. The man behind the desk replied, "We need a Garfield type, but we can't use John Garfield." Sinking further, he agreed to write a confessional piece for Look magazine, describing himself as a dupe, used by irresponsible Reds and Pinkos. Then came the heaviest blow. His friend, the left-wing black actor Canada Lee, who had appeared with him in Body and Soul and who had struggled to find work, died in 1952 at the age of 45, reportedly after severe health problems compounded by stress. The blacklisted Lee had even contemplated shining shoes outside cinemas showing his earlier successful films. Devastated, Garfield went on a 3-day binge, drinking, gambling, wandering the city, talking to strangers while under FBI surveillance. Sleepless for days, his jacket rumpled like an unmade bed, he finally collapsed. He collapsed, and he died. He was 39.
The retrospective on Hollywood Left and the Blacklist, featuring more than 40 titles, will take place at the Locarno Film Festival in August 2026.
Red and Black, Hollywood Left and the Blacklist was written and produced by Ehsan Khoshbacht, presented by Eve P. Thompson, sound design by Rob Sharika.